Yo, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of The Progenitor. This is the podcast where we go over a director's entire filmography, talking about themes, scenes, pacing, and give a brief review all within 30 minutes. So let's get started. But today, we have a special episode. Today is the conclusion episode. We have watched every single film in Sir Ridley Scott's filmography from his first film, The Duellist, to his most recent film, The House of Gucci. The reason why I say the most recent film is because he has two films, one of them Napoleon, which is coming out in late 2023, and he has Gladiator 2 currently in production with a stacked cast and his usual great crew. Since this is a special episode, we're going to do our rankings and we're just going to go over some stylistic things that we've seen carry over every single one of his films, as well as the thematics. And I think you guys know about the thematics. We do them every single episode, and there's definitely more, but these are the ones that really stood out to me. And so we're going to go over those. And of course, we're going to talk about all of his collaborators, and we're just going to tie them all up in a really neat bow and just call it a day. Let's just talk about stylistically. When you see a Ridley Scott film, what are you looking at particularly? Number one, amazing tangible sets, production design of a top-notch caliber, primarily from Arthur Max, who's worked on many of Ridley Scott's films. Not only that, you have a wide screen. Okay, so this is what I would equate it to. If you look at, say, Kingdom of Heaven, what I see in terms of visual scope is very epic and vast and very painterly. A key word to grasp on, painterly, because if you read Ridley Scott's history, he studied to be a painter. He wanted to be a painter. And he storyboards all of his own movies. They have these things called Ridleygrams that you can find online, and just the way he fits everything into the frame. What you see in the frame, what you see that is important to him in the frame, they're always super epic, super vast, and the scope is always large. Okay? So, number one, you have painterly, epic, widescreen, huge vistas, enormous scale. And then you have this top-notch production design from Arthur Max and some of his other less frequent collaborators. And another thing that you get stylistically is the pacing. One of the things that Ridley Scott likes to do is have a deliberate pacing. And that's normally to set a specific tone. And we talked about this with Alien. We talked about this with Blade Runner and Duelist. These are Duelist especially is kind of a meditation on violence and on obsession, right? Alien, he has this deliberate pacing to get you into make you feel like the terror and the dread is slowly creeping up on you, okay? And he has this deliberate pacing, but you have to see the specific films, right? So Thelma and Louise, that film feels more breezy, and his editing style, his pacing goes with that breeze. If you go back to Prometheus, then you get the feel of Alien, right? And so he has a deliberate pacing, but it's also based on story. So I would say that with the production design, with the visuals. Another example would probably be Exodus, Gods and Kings, right? Number one, you have really great production design, but one of my main qualms about this movie is it feels like there's a lot more CGI put into it. And whenever Ridley Scott puts more CGI than practical, it loses a feel, it kind of becomes a little soulless for him. So it feels like Exodus was more of a cash grab than, for example, say Kingdom of Heaven. A lot of Kingdom of Heaven were created sets. Okay, so there's a more tangibility. Of course, he has CGI in that film, especially at the very final fight in Jerusalem. But if you look particularly at the way they created Jerusalem, they had a huge set for that film as well. So it still has that tangibility, and you feel the heat and you feel the vastness of the scope. Whereas for Exodus, I didn't feel as much of that tangibility, especially when you go into that ancient Egyptian city. So I think that's a very important thing, when you feel the tangible versus when you feel that there's a cold CGI feel to it. For example, Prometheus looks a lot better than Alien Covenant. And Alien, which is over 30 or 40 years older, looks so much better than Prometheus. Why? Because the tangibility of the sets. That's the primary thing, and just the overall pacing. Because when you get to Prometheus, you kind of have an understanding of what's going on with that film, right? Because people have been talking about it. They're like, yeah, this is going to be like a prequel to Alien. So you kind of already go into it having a preconceived notion of how the film is going to be. So there you go. But all in all, the films that have that tangible feel and don't feel manufactured in the perspective of the visuals, the editing, and the production design. Because for Ridley Scott, I feel like those are the three main things, and through these three main things, he's able to create an additional layer to the characters. And I think a lot of people say he's more style than substance, but a lot of the substance is in the creation of the sets and the time period and the pacing and the tone, right? And that leads me back to Blade Runner, right? Blade Runner is the ultimate Ridley Scott film. Tangible sets, they look beautiful. Even when it's like a matte painting of a city, it looks amazing. They use miniatures. They created all those spinners. So this is Ridley Scott having a ball with technology, creating these things, not just miniatures, not just matte paintings, not just creating sets. He's going all out on this new future world. And on top of that, that future that he's created with the tall buildings, the acid rain, this adds to the characterization of each of the characters and what their goals are. So, for example, Roy Batty, he goes back, and the first scene you really see him in is he's trying to find Hong, right? And it's in a cold space because Hong needs a lot of coal to create these eyeballs and to create these materials for the creation of the eyeballs, right? So that coldness goes in with the character of Batty because at that very point he's about to kill Hong, so it shows his coldness, his cruelty. But later on, you see him with his crew, and that coldness and that cruelty goes away when he's with the toy designer, the one with the genetic issues. I forgot his name, but he's very important in the film. J.F. Sebastian, right? Played by William Sanderson. So I think it's just so amazing how he pulls everything together. And yes, the pacing is very, very deliberate. And I think it goes back to kind of the idea of a film noir and how sometimes these cases are never solved kind of feeling to it. And I think he was trying to get to that. So for me, although Blade Runner seems to be very problematic, I also think, and we're going to get to the ratings, but it is in the top 10, and we're gonna get to it. Now, in terms of themes, we've kind of beat it over the head every single episode, but number one, empower female characters. He has this in most every film, and the films that he doesn't have it, those are kind of the films that might not be his best. You know what I mean? So I'm looking through his filmography right now and say Body of Lies, not his particular best. Black Rain, I don't really remember a lot of female characters in that one. White Squall, definitely not a strong female character. There should have been one in Jeff Bridges' wife in that film, but they kind of squandered it because at the end of the day, there are way too many characters in that movie. 1492, another one where there is a strong female character, but she's not in the film that much. And that's Sigourney Weaver's Queen character. So she's not really in the film that much. Exodus, Gods and Kings, really not a strong female character. A lot of the females in that film are squandered. And then on the other side, there's strong female characters and they kind of overpower the film, like Legend. Mia Sara is really great in the film, but this might not be her fault, actually. It's actually Tom Cruise's fault because he's not that charismatic in this movie. But let's say someone to watch over me. My favorite character in that film is Lorraine Bracco, and they didn't utilize her correctly. She became a side character where Mimi Rogers started building in the sappy damsel in distress, right? And I think that kind of clashes against Ridley Scott's ideas of women, you know? So that's kind of my perspective. For me, the strong female characters, Thelma and Louise, up there, you know? And then you have Pris from Blade Runner, Sigourney Weaver, Alien, right? Another one that is very interesting is the Duellist. There isn't a strong female character per se, but there is that stubbornness to survive. And one of the ladies that Hubert, Keith Carradine's character, this female character calls out the fraud of this honor and how these duels sapped away the love that they could have had, and she ended up poor and penniless. So it's very sad, but at the end of the day, she had a very strong will. So I think that's why that film still works for me. Next up, Nature Space is a hostile and uncontrollable environment. Yeah, every single one of his films, it's the environment that the characters are in that are bringing in these outside forces that are uncontrollable, whether it be Mars, whether it be an alien planet, or whether it be a future, right, that you don't know how to get out of, or the desert in Kingdom of Heaven when the Knights Templar are going across the desert to fight Salahuddin, and they don't bring any water, right? So I think it's beautiful. And Thelma and Louise, what is the last scene? Is that they drive their car off of a cliff. Beautiful. Age does not mean a thing. A lot of these films, that's a big thing, but it's not the biggest theme. I think it's just funny because a lot of the characters that are younger, they seem to be wiser. So do not trust rich people. I'm going to tie that in with distrust of authority and money is coveted. This is a big thing. It goes throughout a lot of his films. Even Prometheus, even Alien, even Blade Runner, Gladiator. There's these people with power, and through power, they have money, or through money, they have power. And this power and this money corrupts them. And Wayland wants more life. So he goes to this planet and gets massacred by an alien or by the engineer, right? Or Ash in Alien, programmed by his overlords to find this ultimate creature no matter what. And guess who his bosses are? The corporate heads, right? So, and then don't even get me started with House of Gucci, the counselor. The counselor wants more money. And guess what? Drugs, right? He wants to sell drugs to get the money. And he gets screwed. I think another movie that I haven't really talked about, but is definitely in the is definitely in the top 10 is American Gangster, right? American Gangster. Denzel's character wants power, wants money, wants to protect his family. He goes into it with altruistic perspective, but is quickly tainted by this world. And he thinks he's doing good for him, right? For his family. But all these other people are, being poisoned out on the street, right? And you got Richie Roberts, who ruins his own personal life to get these guys. So, it's just that's what I love about that movie. It's that dichotomy between the two characters. Another one I haven't mentioned is The Last Duel, right? Everyone is an asshole except for Jodie Comer's character, Marguerite de Carouge. So already you see all these themes tying together. Violence don't solve a thing, brains do. A lot of the case, this is a huge thing about strategizing and figuring out how to adapt, right? So this kind of goes in violence don't solve a thing, kind of delves into the only way to survive is to adapt, right? Because instead of being violent, you got to find another way. You got to find another way, which is to adapt and get around the corners. I haven't even talked about Gladiator. Come on, guys. Gladiator, one of the all time greats, right? Lucilla is such a strong female character, and she's got a crazy brother who wants to like sleep with her. So she's got to, adapt and move around him and try not to get caught, right? And she's scheming in the background, but she can't let him know because at the same time she still loves him like a brother, right? And so there's oh, Gladiator is such a deep movie that a lot of people just look at the surface level, which is fine. It's hey, let's get down to it. Gladiator is one of the greatest action movies, sword and sandals. But there's definitely something going on underneath that violent facade. And you know what it is? It's a great movie. That's what's going on. Next up, what else we got? Battle of the Sexes. I would put that with Happy Wife, Happy Life. Again, that goes with empowered female characters. And I don't want to go too deep into that. Do not trust robots, androids. Yeah, that's all throughout Prometheus, Alien Covenant, Blade Runner, Alien, right? All throughout those. The afterlife, death. Blade Runner had a bunch of death, right? I want more life. Alien. And I think a lot of times, if you look at the history of when these films are produced, you'll see that Ridley Scott might have been going through something personally. So, for example, Blade Runner, his older brother, Frank Scott, had passed away from cancer. So, he was facing that. And Tony Scott passed away when he was making The Counselor and Exodus, right? So these are always things on his mind. I don't remember. There might have been something going on when he made Gladiator and Kingdom of Heaven, but and and that also brings up his continued fascination with faith, right? Kingdom of Heaven is one of the most faithful films from an atheist ever made, I would say. And then you have Exodus, which is the worst faithful film and a true like film that doesn't understand the context of the entire Bible story of Exodus, right? So, but overall, you got your themes. So let's talk about some collaborations, especially we got Arthur Max, we got Pietro Scalia as the editor, Dodie Dorn, and one of his two best cinematographers, John Matheson, and we have Darius Wolski, right? So Darius Wolski was the guy he's been working on for the past like 6 films or 7 films. James Matheson was the guy he was working on with since before Gladiator. I think maybe G.I. Jane or so. Let me double check that. But oh no, G.I. Jane was Hugh Johnson. So Hugh Johnson made a couple films. But what you get is with John Matheson, you get the wide scope. You get the vast shots. You get that epic feel. Whereas with Darius Wolski, you get the gray tone, the coldness of these characters. It's more of a visual representation of the characters with these cold grays. Whereas with John Matheson, you get this wide scope for Gladiator, for Kingdom of Heaven, for even Matchstick Man, where he's a little more experimental with the lens flares and such to dive into the psychology of the characters. So I think it's really interesting. And on top of that, you have the pacing, the editing from Dodie Dorn, Pietro Scalia, and recently Claire Simpson, right? The last 2 or 3 movies were with Claire Simpson. Now we get to my favorite part because I'm just the guy who loves doing lists. And as I go through the list, I'm going to mention why I sort of put these things where they are. So, last place, film 27, Legend. This is the one Ridley Scott film I don't get. And I think it might be because I haven't seen the director's cut. But number one, Tom Cruise is seriously miscast, has no charm with his character, and is overshadowed by Mia Sara and Tim Curry. And I think that's a big no-no. And the fact that there's a bunch of like lore about these weird unicorns and how they're the epitome of goodness or whatever. I just found all of it just kind of like, what is going on? And what is with Ridley Scott's fascination with unicorns? I mean, look at Blade Runner, right? But anyways, let's go to number 26. Exodus, Gods and Kings. This is the worst Bible story interpretation ever. And let me talk about the plagues. The plagues are the best part of the film. The performances are actually really great. I think Joel Edgerton and Christian Bale really stand out. I think Ben Mendelsohn is terrible in this film, but it's because his character is underwritten. But overall, this film should have had John Matheson's touch to it. It should not have had the gray, grungy feel of Darius Wolski. And the main thing is because it's a Bible story, it's a story of hope, it's a story of love, and it's a story of the freaking Passover. There is a lot of darkness in this story, right? In the Bible story, with all the firstborns being killed, but at the same time, there's a lot of light, right? And and the splitting of the Red Seas. I think it's cool how they did it. It's like a tsunami or something, but it's still very strange that they didn't just do the Red Sea splitting. Whatever. It's fine. Number 25, Someone to Watch Over Me. Now, my main problem with this film is they had a great character in Lorraine Bracco and Tom Berenger. Their relationship is what the film should stand on, and Mimi Rogers should have just been a lady that had to be protected and just became a character that helped the detective get to what he wanted, while his wife supported and lifted him up. Whereas in this film, it became just like a torrid, like sexual affair kind of film. And I hated how it turned out because the wife takes him back in the end. If you're going to have that that torrid sexual affair than just leave him and then let what happens happen. But the way they should have done was they should have had the wife and the husband working together and getting to know the rich lady together rather than having this cliched love affair kind of thing. I just thought it was so stupid. 24, 1492, Conquest of Paradise. Now, this is the Christopher Columbus film. The reason why I didn't like this one as much is because it didn't have as much of the struggle. He finds America. The Indians and natives seem to just welcome him with open arms. And then he tries to bring more Spaniards over, and they all start to go crazy because they want more power. But like, there's no inherent struggle at the beginning when they're crossing to the new lands. It's just one scene of, oh my gosh, there's gonna be a mutiny, and then all of a sudden they find land, right? I think that happens way too quick. Hannibal, number 23. Now, my problem with Hannibal is it doesn't really have the soul that Silence of the Lambs has. It's super violent, super bloody, super stylistic, and it's well shot. And this is the one where it has that chiaroscuro noir lighting, so it's really up my alley. But my problem is it's really way too violent, and the fact that Hannibal feeds brains to this Chinese kid kind of makes sense, but at the same time, it's gross, guys. It really is. Now, number 22, A Good Year. Now, I feel like Hannibal and A Good Year might be able to flip, but the one thing that A Good Year has going for it is charm. I really enjoy Russell Crowe and Marion Cotillard's relationship. I enjoy Albert Finney, and I enjoy Freddie Highmore. I enjoy the charm of all these characters, and the story might not be like great, but it's charming enough for me to say, okay, this is doable, right? Whereas Hannibal is kind of just ugly. This guy cuts his face off with shards of a mirror. Ugh. Oh, you can only watch so much of that. Next up, so A Good Year is 22. Now we're to 21, White Squall. Now this has the struggle that 1492 is missing, but it has way too many characters, and you can't dive into their relationships enough. For example, Jeff Bridges and his wife. You don't really sympathize when certain people die in this movie because you don't really get to know them because it's spending more time on other people. Now, if this movie might have been paced differently or looked at characters differently, it might have been better. But overall, the best thing about this film is the actual White Squall. White Squall. The cast is amazing, but the White Squall is even better. Now, number 20, G.I. Jane, and I'm not going to go into the whole, well, I will, Will Smith, Chris Rock, and Jada Pinkett Smith drama, but this is a very good action movie with a very good Demi Moore. My only problem with this movie is the inherent way he shoots certain scenes with Demi Moore in it, because they clash with the rest of the film. There's like scenes where she's doing workouts where she's wearing a halter top or whatnot, and her, she's drenched in sweat, so you can see through it kind of. And I feel like he did that for the producers. Because the rest of the film, he doesn't sexualize Demi Moore. He lifts her up in all of her physical pursuits. But like in these particular scenes, it kind of goes against what he built in the narrative. But in terms of all the action scenes and the narrative, it's a pretty good film. So I'm putting it at 20. 19. When I first saw this movie, I hated it. So it would have been like in the bottom 20s. But I watched it, and Michael Douglas's character slowly became more sentimental. Not sentimental, but sympathetic. You kind of understand him more. And the fact that Andy Garcia is just amazing in this film lifts it up even more. And then I think his name is Ken. What's his name? Ken Takakura is really great in this film. There is some random Kate Capshaw character. She works at the clubs or whatnot. Uh, Forgettable, but this is one of those movies where I remember seeing those big fans, the spinning fans at that nightclub. And my favorite scene is when they sing together. I don't remember the song, but it's a very, very good Japanese song. Next up, 18, Alien Covenant. This is my least favorite of the sci-fi films. And one of the major reasons is this one feels a lot more CGI. And another thing is the characters just seem much more stupid. But at the same time, it really builds on the lore. The best part about this movie is the David versus Walter. And I think that is fascinating, especially when you bring in to the frame like Daniels, the Catherine Waterston character, and the twist ending at the very end. I thought was really fun, and it definitely is a step down in regards to the Alien lore. And I'm not even considering Alien 3 and Alien Resurrection. I'm just talking about Aliens, Prometheus, and Alien Covenant. But it's still a really fun movie, and it has some really great sequences. And when you find out what happens to Elizabeth Shaw, oh man, you just really see the diabolical nature of David. So I think that was really great. Okay, next up, 17, Robin Hood. I used to really like this. This would have been closer to the top 15 maybe back in the day. But the more I saw it, the more these things were cloying at me. One of my major qualms with the film is the Maid Marian riding onto the battlefield with a bunch of kids and leading the charge in black armor with a sword. Now, I love her character throughout the film, and then it gets to this scene, and I'm just like, you don't need her to be on the battlefield. I just thought it was a little too much. My main favorite scenes is just how charming her and Russell Crowe are. And although this is like the origin story, I wish they had younger actors and actresses to play this. But it's still really fun up to the point where she decides to like fight, because at the end of the day she just becomes a damsel in distress because Mark Strong gets the better of her. And throughout the film, she's an expert healer. She's a good teacher. She's looking out for these kids, nursing them. But in no point in case do you ever think she could fight. And all of a sudden, she's Wonder Woman. And then all of a sudden, she's not. And she gets beaten down. So what's the point? That's kind of my disappointment in that. I wish she had a different role. Another thing, though, is that this Robin Hood is Robin Longstride. No one knows who this guy is, and all of a sudden they're like, okay, lead us. We'll follow you. Even the King of England will follow you. I thought it was kind of a stretch, but it was still fun. Now, number 16, we get to Body of Lies. What I like about this film is Mark Strong and Russell Crowe. They raised this film up to a different tier. Now, Leonardo DiCaprio is always great, but this is not one of his best performances. But you can tell he's kind of having fun with Russell Crowe. But dude, Hani Salam in this film, played by Mark Strong, is a revelation. So I definitely recommend it for that. Now we are on the top 15, guys. 15, All the Money in the World. This could have been great, except Mark Wahlberg's character, Fletcher Chase, who makes no sense, makes terrible decisions. But this film is bolstered by the wonderful cinematography by Darius Wolski. The first 1 minute of this film is a beautiful black and white, inspired by 8.5, Federico Fellini, inspired by Michelangelo Antonioni, just like a beautiful shot, black and white, and I love that. And on top of that, you have great performances by Michelle Williams and Christopher Plummer, and just overall everything else is top notch. And then you get Mark Wahlberg, and then that takes it down a notch. Let's go to 14, House of Gucci. I really had a lot of fun in this movie. My only problem is Jared Leto's character is remarkably terrible. And Jared Leto is not a good actor. And I've seen a number of his films now. And what I see mainly is that he likes to overact. So it just didn't do it for me. But overall, everything else is hitting on all cylinders except especially Lady Gaga. And Adam Driver is a lot of fun. I kind of wish we got a little more insight into Adam Driver's character, but I think when it comes down to it, it's Lady Gaga's movie. Number 13, The Counselor. This movie is dark as hell, but it's fun and it is twisted. And what I said was it's kind of like if Tony Scott made a Ridley Scott film. And because you have these wide, epic scope, cinematography, the pacing feels like it's quicker and faster than a normal Ridley Scott film. The performances are top notch. At the same time, it has this darkness. And he made this at the time Tony Scott passed. And you can just feel that underlying foreboding feeling of death permeating throughout the film. And it doesn't bring the film down, which is really interesting. And it's one of his most underrated, energetic, crime, dark comedies. It's such a weird film, but I highly recommend it. And that's number 13, The Counselor. Number 12, Matchstick Men. I love this movie. I felt so bad. It used to be on my top 10, and it slowly moved out, and I'll explain why, but pretty much this is one of my favorite Nicolas Cage films. It's a con man film, and Nicolas Cage ratchets it up, but don't forget, you've got Sam Rockwell, you got Alison Lohman, just all time great performances. Ridley Scott is working with John Matheson, Dodie Dorn. It's a really jazzy feel to it. It's really, really fun movie. And it's got one of the classic Nicolas Cage outbursts. It's just really fun. Number 11, Prometheus. Back into that alien lore, and this one is just super interesting in how much it tackles in terms of themes, in terms of visuals. And I saw this, and the reason it's also so high is because of when I saw it and where I saw it. I saw it in IMAX with my cousins and my sister and brother-in-law, and it was just such an amazing, and 3D. It was just such an amazing, like, Ridley Scott is one of those directors that can handle IMAX and 3D together, and he kills it. Now, if you just watch it on a regular Blu-ray player, it still works. It still has that feel. But this film has a lot of really fun scenes. One of them is like this C-section that goes crazy. And yeah, it's just a really, really dark origin story for the Xenomorphs. And yeah, I highly recommend it. But unfortunately, it's not in the top 10. It's number 11. But now we're getting to the top 10. Number 10, American Gangster. What I love about this movie is just the set design, production design. The performances are stellar. You have Ruby Dee, who was nominated for an Oscar. You got Denzel Washington, Russell Crowe. These guys are the heavy hitters in the film. But at the same time, you got Chiwetel Ejiofor. You got Common in one of his better performances. I wouldn't put Common anywhere near like the top of the best actors, rappers. That'd probably go to Ludacris, but it's just so grand in scope. But it's a gangster movie, and it's epic. It's Harlem, and then it's Thailand, Vietnam. It's just really fun, and I hate heroin movies because it always shows them putting needles. This one has little of that, thank God. But what it does have is this amazing action set piece near the end when Russell Crowe's character does, a raid on one of Denzel Washington's drug houses. So that's really fun. Number 9, The Last Duel. Okay, so this might be a little controversial, but yeah, it's one of his most recent films, and it's one of my favorites, right? Number 9. And just really great performances, Matt Damon and Adam Driver, but Jodie Comer really steps it up in this one. She's classically beautiful. She's a great actress. Adam Driver is really great. He plays one of the biggest dirtbags. Matt Damon is a dick. Ben Affleck, in one of his best supporting actor roles, really hams it up and kills it. And you can tell when someone is loving their job, and he's loving it in this film. Oh, and I didn't even talk about the score. Harry Gregson Williams, and I'm going to get back to him later, but he is great. And this is a great score. One of the top. Now, let's move on. Thelma and Louise at number 8. And guess what? Criterion Collection is releasing it with some special features like commentary tracks by Scott, and it has Boy and Bicycle, Scott's first short film. But Thelma and Louise, what can I say? Just a great buddy comedy, buddy road show, and Harvey Keitel playing a Southerner, Brad Pitt in one of his early roles playing a sex pot, and it's just so jazzy. It goes every now and then. Ridley Scott decides to be like, "Hey guys, I know how to play jazz." You got Matchstick Men, you got I would say House of Gucci is kind of like that, but you got Ridley Scott just saying, "I'm gonna have fun here, and I want you guys to smile too." Okay? No more dread, no more foreboding. Let's have some fun. And boom, Thelma and Louise, one of his greats. And great wide, epic scope desert shots. Anyways, number 7. This one actually climbed a lot on this recent revisit, but it is The Martian. And what I love about The Martian is the hope that it has in the film, the human will to survive and to live and to work and collaborate together. And Ridley Scott doesn't really do that. Ridley Scott doesn't really have a lot of hope in his movies. I wouldn't say he's more depressing or nihilistic or anything, but it just doesn't come naturally in his films. But this one definitely had it. And I just thought when he does it better than anyone, right? And the visual effects in this one are amazing. Production design, amazing. Matt Damon is great. And then you have the supporting cast of the astronauts that are coming back to save them. You have NASA with Chiwetel Ejiofor. You got Jeff Daniels and Benedict Wong. Come on, Donald Glover. Yeah, there you go. So you just have all-star cast, and everyone is having fun. Everyone is optimistic and at the top of their game. Number 6, this one actually rose up a lot too. The Duellists.
I've seen this movie multiple times, and I finally figured out what it's about, and a lot of times movies require that rewatch to really dive a little deeper into understanding it. And it really is about the obsession and violence and how that permeates through character, right? So you can either let it become who you are, or you can disassociate yourself with it. Like Dubert is like, this is not who I am. I want to have a life outside of that, right? Then you have Harvey Keitel's Verone, that's only has violence, only has this duel and this obsession, has no life outside of it. And I just think it's a beautiful film, wonderfully shot, one of the most beautiful films I've ever seen, actually, with natural lighting. And my favorite shot is the final scene of Feroz looking out over the cliffside, watching as like the sun is, going over the horizon, and that there's nothing left for this guy. Dubert has said that their duels are over, and he has nothing actually to live for anymore, and it makes the film so much more sad, but it's so beautiful. And don't get me wrong, it is deliberately paced. Great performances. One of the other things I'll mention is the choreography. A lot of people say a lot of beautiful things about the fight choreography of the duels. And yeah, that's true. But look at how each of these guys actually stands and comes into the fight. And you'll see that Ferrode and Dubert, they're the way they stand and are poised. You'll see how they see themselves. Dubert kind of stands more barrel, chest out, prideful, while Ferrode is more slink back, looking for the angles, right? So it's really actually interesting. And the way they talk is also very interesting. Dubert talks in like a normal, kind of posh American accent, whereas Ferrode is Harvey Keitel. He has his East Coast, New York, Brooklyn style accent, and so it's harder. It's a little harsher, and you can tell that one of these guys is a little more classy than the other, who's a little more street level. And that also tells you a little bit about their character. So I wouldn't say, hey man, why aren't these guys are supposed to be French? Why are they talking like this? I think there was a stylistic idea behind it, other than the fact that Ridley Scott wanted famous people in his movie. I really love this film. Now, so 6 was The Duelist, 5, Black Hawk Down. One of the greatest war slash violent action movies, a Jerry Bruckheimer production. And, there's no female characters in this movie except for like a wife who missed a phone call and her husband dies. But it's just such a glorious film. And this one is kind of like the camaraderie, right? The Martian has a little of that, has more hope, but Black Hawk Down is male camaraderie, working together, collaboration. We got to get everyone out of this situation. And there's a lot of hope in it with all the violence. One of the best casts ever. Eric Bana, Sam Shepard, and then you have Tom Hardy, a young Tom Hardy, Ewan McGregor. Just like these top notch, not even American. I mean, Josh Hartnett is great. Tom Sizemore, but you also have like, I don't know. It's just expertly plotted, expertly paced, and this one is actually shot by Slawomir Itziak. I don't really know how to say his name, but this is a really beautiful film too. There's a lot of blood and gore, so be careful of that. Parts flying in your face, but overall, like it is machismo to the max. And Eric Bana's character is just so cool. Like I don't know what to say about that. Now number 4, Gladiator. Yes, I remember watching this in this Tinseltown, and what that first fight scene. I think it's like 5 to 8 minutes where the Romans fight the Germanic army. What a fight scene! And the funny thing is, the fights start getting smaller and smaller, right? Because you go from this big war, then you go to the gladiatorial fights, and then you get to the one-on-one. And throughout that, you're discovering so much about Maximus. You're discovering so much about Lucilla and so much about Commodus. And they're all ugly characters, but they all become sort of sympathetic to a point. And a lot of people just say this is a standard revenge film, but it's a little more than that, right? I kind of I kind of mentioned this before, but it's sort of like the way I wish Road to Perdition really was, instead of O'Sullivan and his son, it's Maximus and Juba making their way to Commodus, who would be what was his name? Paul Newman's son in the movie. But yeah, you get my picture. I mean, you get the picture, right? And then no one really talks about Lucilla. Lucilla is one of the most underrated characters in this movie. And she's working behind the scenes but also trying to save her son. It and and I'm glad they're having a sequel to this. And I've never seen Paul Mescal, so good luck to him. But I mean, it's gonna have Denzel Washington, so let's glum on to this sequel, and I'm there for it. But no one talks about Lucilla. No one talks about Commodus that much. He is the most underrated villain in most any of these types of films. And this is a really great movie with a great soundtrack. Oh my gosh, Hans Zimmer. Let's go back really quick. Hans Zimmer in Black Hawk Down as well. Oh, and Harry Gregson Williams in The Martian. And I think Hans Zimmer, let me double check this, but I think he did Thelma and Louise. Yeah, he did Thelma and Louise. So we're talking about master right there. Number 3, Kingdom of Heaven. I know, right? But I'm talking about the director's cut. I'm talking about the ultimate cut that adds in an additional 30 to 45 minutes to this film and builds on characters like Sibylla and builds on the characters like Balian and the Hospitaller. This movie is so deep in the way that it portrays. Well, I felt like it was so deep in the way it portrays the East versus the West in terms of culture, right? The misunderstandings of religions, the extremist perspectives, right? And you see throughout the film that there's extremists on the Christian side that are poisonous, and and then you see the extremists on the Muslim sides that are just as poisonous. And then you see these people that are good but are lost, right? And you see this hospitaller trying to guide Balian, trying to build him up in his faith. And I just think it's the weirdest thing how epic in scope it is, but how intimate in soul that it is. So I really, really love this film, and I implore everyone to take a look again, but make sure you watch the director's cut because there's a lot of faith discussed in that film. And guess what? Edward Norton's in it, and I love me some Edward Norton. Number 2, we're getting to the top 2, and everyone probably has this swapped, but I have Alien as number 2, and this is one of the greatest sci-fi horror films ever. The way it's paced, the face hugger, Ash revealed, Ash's head removed, the xenomorph chasing you, the damn cat, Jinxie or Jax or whatever it's called, and this amazing crew of character actors that no one really can glean onto, but you recognize them, right? Yaphet Kotto, Ian Holm, John Hurt, Harry Dean Stanton, Veronica Cartwright, Tom Skerritt, Sigourney Weaver. Just this amazing cast. Production design, amazing. Ridley Scott just killing it. And supposedly he shot a lot of scenes too. Like, he used to shoot a lot of his scenes. Like, he was a camera operator. And that comes with this keen eye for photography and for painting. And just what an amazing movie. But we are down to number 1, Blade Runner. And I mentioned this before, and I'll mention it again. You have to look at this film in the eyes of Roy Batty, and it makes this film much more interesting. Now, don't get me wrong, Rick Deckard is great, right? Harrison Ford is really good in this film, but Rutger Hauer, there's something a little more mysterious and a lot more charismatic, and it's just number 1, beautiful film. Vangelis, great score, okay? On top of that, this has the best production design of any film I've ever seen, ever, I would say. It's just the spinners, the freaking towers, whenever you think of a futuristic city, you're either thinking Metropolis from the 1920s or this film, okay? And so many films cribbed off of this film. And Ridley Scott was inspired by Mobius and by Sid Mead and all these other heavy metal comics. And it just makes the world so interesting. And this film dives into everything, right? It dives into every single one of Ridley Scott's themes of life, death, and themes of what is being a human really about. And it's just some things that we struggle with, right? And what is Roy Batty really trying to do, right? All he wants is life, right? Don't we want life? Isn't that what we've been trying to do with plastic surgery? Oh, I'll look younger. No, you won't. You look weird. We want more life. We want immortality. Who created us? Why did he create us, right? And then these are things Roy Batty is struggling with, his creator. And he goes to his creator. God, what's his creator's name? Tyrell. The Tyrell Company, right? He goes to Tyrell and asks for more life. And Tyrell can't give it to him. And there's a point where it's even said that Tyrell maybe was a replicant because the real Tyrell passed away. But man, there's just so much lore to this too. So you have the Dangerous Days documentary that's about 3 to 4 hours. You can find it on the Blu-ray, or you can get Future Noir, right? I read that book. That book was so interesting, by Paul Stammen. It was really good book, really great read. But yeah, it's just there's so much lore behind this movie. And on top of that, it's a film noir. It's a future noir. And I love noir films. I love these detective movies. And the tone is just right. There's these fun action set pieces. The last fight scene I thought is super impressive with Harrison Ford running away from Rutger Hauer. And at the very end, Rutger Hauer actually sacrifices himself for Deckard. And And that's such a beautiful reversal. You know what I mean? And again, I'll say the Vangelis score. Now, Ridley Scott is just really great with finding these scores and these composers because his scores are super epic too, right? And on top of, oh my God, sorry, can I go back to number 3? Kingdom of Heaven, Harry Gregson Williams' score, one of the best scores I've ever heard. And it's so diverse in its sound and its melodies and tones. Oh, so good. But back to Vangelis. Man, this is like Tangerine Dream, but like really awesome. And you feel like the vibe and the tone all within. Oh God. Okay, so anyways, I've went through the top 27. I'm gonna go through them one more time. Number 27, Legend. Number 26, Exodus, Gods and Kings. Number 25, Someone to Watch Over Me. Number 24, 1492. Number 23, Hannibal. 22, A Good Year. 21, White Squall. 20, G.I. Jane. 19, Black Rain. 18, Alien Covenant. 17, Robin Hood. 16, Body of Lies. 15, All the Money in the World. 14, House of Gucci. 13, The Counselor. 12, Matchstick Men. 11, Prometheus. Now to the top 10. 10, American Gangster. 9, The Last Duel. 8, Thelma and Louise. 7, The Martian. 6, The Duelists. 5, Black Hawk Down. 4, Gladiator. 3, Kingdom of Heaven. 2, Alien. And number 1, Blade Runner. All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening to me as I go through the entire Sir Ridley Scott filmography up until most recent. First one, The Duelist. 2, House of Gucci. And hey, he's got 2 more movies coming out. So tune in. I'll review those later. But for now, that is the top 27 Ridley Scott films. Thank you. And guess what? Next up, we have another visual stylist who also wanted to be a painter. Now, I'm not talking about Akira Kurosawa because that is a 30 film, amazing filmography that would take a long time, and I hope to do it soon. No, I am talking about someone who is a little newer, 10 films, 9 films currently. No, 10 films. And he's got one coming out this year. My next director that we are jumping into is Zack Snyder. You got it. The guy behind 300, Watchmen, and Man of Steel. So tune in as we go into a deep dive of the filmography of Zack Snyder. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.